I'm sorry. I clicked on the wrong thing and cut myself off. My apologies. So this will be week 3, lecture 1, part 2. Okay, enough said. We have to be Augustine's body, and we will follow Augustine as our rule and exemplar. Now, this led to a renewed emphasis on Augustine's scholarship and Augustine's theology. This return to the sources. We have to go back and read Augustine, because not simply in the handbooks, not simply what Lombard was repeating of Augustine. We have to read Augustine's actual works and read them more carefully and more thoroughly and more broadly than anybody else ever had. And that led to this renewed Augustinian theology with the primacy of grace and primacy of love, and all gets based on an interpretation of Augustine, whereby the hermits believed that they were following in the footsteps of Augustine, to the point where Jordan of Quedlinburg, also in his Liber Vetus Fratrum, talked about the Religio Augustini, the religion of Augustine, and we are the followers of Augustine's religion. Religion at this time was seen as a particular way to fulfill your obligations to God. And it was legally, when you joined a monastic order or a priesthood, you entered into the state of religion, and statu religionis. Christianity was not seen as a religion at this time. It was seen as the faith, the truth. And your particular religion was how you expressed that faith and that truth. Now, Jordan, too, ends up expanding this definition of being a religious. He says every Christian should be a religious. Every Christian should be a saint. That is going to be a very much importance as we go on, because Jordan, too, as we'll see in later lectures, next week or so, or even maybe I think next lecture, we'll see. I'll have to go back and look. Was instrumental in a renewed catechetical endeavor. And that's actually your reading for this week, is Jordan's exposition of the Lord's Prayer. 1327, while all of this is going on, Jordan is lecturing in Erfurt on the Gospel of Matthew. And his lectures on the Lord's Prayer, as part of the Gospel of Matthew, his students said, can you publish that separately? We think they're so good, we'd like to have that as a separate work for us. And Jordan says, okay. And he revises it later, and that gets into a kind of a text. But that is the text you're going to read. Now, when you look at that and click on that, it's my edition and translation. You're not responsible for the Latin, but you can look at it. I'd like you to read the introduction to get a sense of why this is so important, what does this fill in with the whole catechesis endeavor. This is always also before there was such a thing as the catechism, which we'll talk about later, because that's something developed with Luther. But there certainly was catechesis. So read the introduction, read the English text, and that's the basis for your first textual analysis, which is to put this text within its context of the time. Within the Augustinian Renaissance context of the Reformation of the later Middle Ages, and on it goes. Okay? So that's where we're going here. That's what we're looking at. And this all gets back to the concept of what does it mean to be an Augustinian? What does it mean to follow in the footsteps of Augustine? Leading to the question of, then was Luther an Augustinian? Now, at the time, in the 14th century, if someone were to say, are you an Augustinian? If you were not a member of the Order of Hermits of St. Augustine, you would look at them and say, what are you talking about? What? Meaning the term Augustinian, being an Augustinian in the later Middle Ages, meant being a member of the Order of St. Augustine. That was the historical context of the term. So thereby, late medieval Augustinianism cannot be separated from being part of the order of hermits of St. Augustine. Is it a theological definition? It's the theological definition of the order, but it's also the religious life of the order, the historical mentality, the ideology of the order of following Augustine, knowing Augustine better than anybody. And what is this concept, this almost Augustinian ideology of being the body embodiment of Augustine? There, with the hermits in the 14th century, what's the relationship between that and Luther, who was a member of the order? That's kind of the question. But we first have to understand what was going on in the 14th century. That's why this is the focus here, where we see a true historical Augustinian Renaissance, a rebirth of Augustine. The order is the embodiment of Augustine that was indeed to have an impact as we go further. And Luther even was aware of this conflict, but we'll get there when we get there. Now, I'm sorry for having screwed up and having to conclude this lecture with a separate part, but that's the way it is. I'm not going to go back and do it all over again, no offense. If you have questions, let me know. But that's where we are right now, and that's I hope you've seen the connection between what was going on here in terms of late medieval Augustinianism with the religio-political context that I talked about last time, with the hermits supporting the papal position and receiving privileges from the Pope that led to this new rebirth of Augustine within the Order of Hermits of St. Augustine. That's what this is about. Okay. Thank you very much, and I'll be back before too long. Bye-bye.